The gavel came down like a gunshot. Margaret Flynn's hands shook as strange men circled her like wolves, their eyes stripping away what little dignity she had left. Her baby whimpered against her chest. This was how her story would end, sold to the highest bidder, a piece of property, to settle a dead man's debts. Then hoofbeats shattered the summer air. A lone rider appeared through the dust, his voice cutting through the crowd like a blade. "I'll take them." Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and stay with us until the very end of this story. Comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Margaret and Miles's journey reaches across the world. The heat pressed down on Redemption Creek like a fist. Margaret Flynn stood on the courthouse steps with William bundled against her chest, 6 months old, and mercifully asleep. She couldn't look at the faces gathered below, couldn't bear to see the hunger in their eyes. "Lot 17, Sheriff Coleman called out. One widow woman able-bodied known to cook and sew. One male infant healthy, to be sold together to satisfy the outstanding debts of the deceased Patrick Flynn, totaling $107. Margaret's throat closed. They wouldn't even say her name, just widow woman, as if Patrick's death had erased every part of her that mattered. "Do I hear $20? A hand shot up. Margaret kept her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance, those purple peaks that promised freedom she'd never know. 25. 30. The numbers climbed. Margaret's heart hammered against William's small body. She felt him stir his tiny fist curling against her collarbone. "Don't wake up, baby. Please don't cry." $60. This time Margaret's resolve broke. She looked. Dutch Kearney stood there, the mine foreman, his beard stained with tobacco juice. His eyes traveled up her body, slow and deliberate. She knew what he was buying. It wasn't her cooking. 65, countered another man, a freighter maybe, or a railroad man passing through. It didn't matter. They were all the same. Sheriff Coleman raised his gavel. "I have $65. Do I hear?" 80. Dutch Kearney smiled at her, showing brown teeth. Margaret's stomach turned over. 90, the freighter said. 100. The crowd shifted, murmuring. $100 was real money. Dutch Kearney crossed his thick arms and planted his feet wider, like he was daring anyone to outbid him. The sheriff scanned the crowd. "I have $100. Going once." Margaret closed her eyes. "Patrick. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She remembered the night he'd proposed in that little parlor in Ohio. He'd been so nervous his hands shook. "Come west with me, Margaret. I'll build us a life out there, a real life." She'd believed him. God help her, she'd believed every word. Now Patrick was 6 weeks dead, thrown from a horse and broken on the rocks below Miller's Pass. The doctor's bills and the funeral had taken everything. The bank had come for the house. The store had come for what she owed on credit. And now the law had come for her. Going twice. William stirred against her, whimpering. Her arms tightened around him. There was nowhere to run. The gavel rose. Then the hoofbeats came. Fast and hard, like thunder rolling down from the mountains. The crowd turned as one. Margaret opened her eyes. A rider came down Main Street at a gallop, dust kicking up golden in the afternoon sun. He didn't slow until he was right there in front of the courthouse, his horse dancing sideways, foam on its neck. The man who swung down from the saddle was tall and lean, maybe 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that had seen too much. He wore Confederate gray pants and a Union cavalry jacket, both faded, almost colorless. A single revolver rode his hip. Dust covered him head to boots. "Auction's not over," Sheriff Coleman said. The stranger ignored him. He looked straight at Margaret, and something passed between them, recognition maybe, or just the simple acknowledgement of one broken thing seeing another. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. It hit the sheriff's podium with a heavy thunk. $120, the stranger said. "Gold, I'll take them." The crowd erupted. Dutch Kearney pushed forward, his face purple. "Now hold on." "You can count it," the stranger said. "It's all there." Sheriff Coleman opened the pouch, and his eyes went wide. He poured the contents onto his ledger book, gold coins catching the light, more money than most of these men would see in a year. "This is irregular," Coleman said, but there was no conviction in it. $120 beats 100, the stranger said. "That's arithmetic." Dutch Kearney stepped closer. He was 6 inches shorter than the stranger, but twice as wide. "Who the hell are you?" "Miles Sutton." "I don't know you." "No reason you should." "Well, Miles Sutton, maybe I'm not done bidding." Miles finally looked at him. His eyes were gray as winter ice. "Yeah, you are." Dutch's hand drifted toward his belt. Miles didn't move, didn't even blink, but something in his stillness made Dutch stop. The mine foreman's jaw worked like he wanted to spit. "You know what you just bought," Dutch said. "A woman with nothing, a baby with no future, and debts that'll follow them to the grave." "Then I guess they're my debts now." "You're making a mistake." "Won't be my first." Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. "I have $120 in gold, going once, going twice." He glanced around the crowd. No one else raised a hand. Even Dutch Kearney stayed quiet. "Sold to Miles Sutton." The gavel came down. Margaret's knees nearly buckled. William woke up and started to cry, his small voice breaking through the shocked silence. She bounced him automatically, her mind reeling. "Sold. I've been sold." Miles Sutton climbed the courthouse steps. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the old scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. 3 days of beard shadowed his jaw. He stopped 2 feet away, careful not to crowd her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to lay a hand on you. You have my word on that." Margaret stared at him. Her whole body was shaking. "Then why?" He looked away out at the mountains. "Because no decent man could stand there and watch this happen." "You don't know me." "No, ma'am, I don't." "You just paid $120 for 2 people you've never met." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or memory. "I knew your husband." Margaret's breath caught. "Patrick." "Yes, ma'am. Patrick Flynn. We served together. Shiloh Stones River Missionary Ridge." Miles met her eyes again. "He saved my life at Chickamauga. Took a bayonet meant for me. I owed him a debt. Now I mean to pay it." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. Patrick had never talked much about the war. When he did, his eyes went distant, and his voice got quiet. She'd learned not to ask, but she remembered one night, maybe a year after they married, when he'd woken up screaming. She'd held him while he shook, and he'd whispered, "I killed a boy today, Margaret. Just a boy, no older than 16. She'd never asked which day, which battle. It didn't matter. The war had taken pieces of Patrick and never given them back. "He never mentioned you," Margaret said. "No reason he would. We lost touch after Appomattox." Miles shifted his weight. "I didn't know he'd died until I rode through here 2 days ago. Asked after him at the saloon. They told me about the accident. About the auction." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Flynn." Tears burned Margaret's eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry here, not in front of these people. "Come on," Miles said gently. "Let's get you away from here." "Where are we going?" "Boarding house for tonight. Tomorrow my ranch. It's half a day's ride north." "And then what?" He paused. "Then you figure out what you want to do with your life. You're not my property, Mrs. Flynn. I bought your freedom, not you." Margaret looked into his face, searching for the lie. But there was only exhaustion and something deeper, a bone-deep weariness that matched her own. William cried harder, his small face red and scrunched. Miles glanced at the baby, then quickly away, like he didn't quite know what to do with the sight of a child. "He's hungry," Margaret said. "Then let's get him fed." Miles offered his arm. Margaret looked at that outstretched arm for a long moment. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust this stranger. But what choice did she have? Dutch Kearney was still watching from the street below, his eyes promising things that made her skin crawl. She took Miles's arm. They walked down the courthouse steps together. The crowd parted to let them through, silent now. Margaret kept her chin up and her eyes forward. She could feel their stares, could hear the whispers starting already. Bought herself a man. Wonder what she promised him. Poor bastard doesn't know what he's in for. Miles helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to steady her, careful and impersonal. He smelled like dust and leather and sage. "Hold on," he said quietly, and clicked his tongue. They rode down Main Street at a walk. Behind them, Dutch Kearney stood in the street watching them go, his face hard as granite. Margaret felt his eyes on her back until they turned the corner. "That man," she said quietly, "Dutch Kearney, he's going to be trouble. Let him try. You don't understand. He runs the mine. Half the men in this town work for him." "Then half the men in this town better stay out of my way." There was no bravado in Miles's voice, just simple fact. Margaret twisted to look at his face. His eyes were fixed ahead, his jaw set. "You really fought with Patrick?" "I did." "Tell me something about him. Something only a soldier would know." Miles was quiet for a moment. Then, he sang. Terrible voice, couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but he sang anyway. Irish songs mostly. "The Rose of Tralee" was his favorite. Used to drive the sergeant half mad. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "One time at Stones River, we were pinned down for 6 hours. Artillery pounding us, men dying all around. And Patrick just started singing. Quiet at first, then louder. Pretty soon half the company joined in. Didn't change anything, we still lost 30 men that day. But for those few minutes we weren't scared anymore." Margaret's throat closed. She remembered Patrick singing that song while he worked his voice rough and off-key but full of joy. She'd teased him about it, called him her terrible Irish tenor. "He sang it to William," she whispered, "every night before bed." Miles didn't respond, but his arm around her waist tightened just a fraction. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building at the edge of town, paint peeling but solid. Miles dismounted and helped Margaret down, his hands careful on her waist. William was wailing now, his small fists flailing. "Shh, baby," Margaret whispered. "Shh, it's all right." But it wasn't all right. Nothing was all right. "Mrs. Donnelly!" Miles called toward the house. The door opened, and a gray-haired woman appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes went from Miles to Margaret to the crying baby, and understanding flashed across her face. "Dear God," Mrs. Donnelly breathed. "Miles Sutton, what have you done? What needed doing?" He gestured to Margaret. "This is Mrs. Flynn. She and the baby need a room, the best one you've got. I've only got 2 rooms open, and one of them is yours. Then she takes mine. I'll sleep in the storeroom." Mrs. Donnelly's eyes narrowed. "People will talk." "People are already talking. Whole town just watched me buy her at auction." Miles's jaw tightened. At least this way she's got a locked door between her and anyone who thinks that purchase came with certain rights. Margaret flinched. The words were blunt but true. That's exactly what men like Dutch Kearney had been thinking. Mrs. Donnelly looked at Margaret for a long moment, then nodded. "Come in, dear. Let's get that baby settled." Inside the boarding house was dim and cool. Margaret followed Mrs. Donnelly up a narrow staircase, William's cries echoing off the walls. Behind them, she heard Miles talking quietly, with someone, Mr. Donnelly maybe, or another boarder. "Here we are." Mrs. Donnelly opened a door at the end of the hall. "It's not much, but it's clean." The room was small but neat, a bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand, a chair by the window. Sunlight slanted through the glass, golden and warm. A man's room. Miles's room. A few books stacked on the windowsill. A razor and shaving mug on the washstand. the faint smell of tobacco and soap. "There's water in the pitcher," Mrs. Donnelly said. "I'll bring up something for you to eat. Do you need anything for the baby?" "Milk," Margaret said. "If you have any, and maybe some cloths. I'll bring what I can." Mrs. Donnelly hesitated at the door. "That man downstairs, he's not what you might think. Known Miles Sutton 3 years now. He's quiet, keeps to himself, but decent. Never seen him drunk, never seen him raise his voice or his hand. You could do worse." "I've already done worse," Margaret said before she could stop herself. Then she caught herself. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean Patrick was a good man. He just had bad luck." Mrs. Donnelly's expression softened. "Patrick Flynn was your husband?" "Yes." "I met him once. Came through here looking for work about 2 years back. Seemed like a good man." She paused. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. You rest now. I'll be back shortly." When she was gone, Margaret sank onto the bed. William was still crying, his small face crumpled with hunger and distress. She unbuttoned her dress with shaking hands and brought him to her breast. He latched on immediately, his cries cutting off into small gulping sounds. Margaret closed her eyes. The tears she'd been holding back finally came silent and hot. "I was sold today." Sold. The humiliation burned through her, made her stomach churn. She thought of her mother dead these 10 years. What would she say if she could see her daughter now? Sold at auction like livestock, bought by a stranger, nursing her baby in a room that smelled like another man's tobacco. But there was something else too. Something she was almost afraid to acknowledge. Relief. Because Miles Sutton had outbid Dutch Kearney. And whatever happened next, at least she wasn't going back to that mine foreman's shack tonight. At least William was safe in her arms, nursing peacefully, unaware that his whole life had just changed. She thought about Patrick, really thought about him for the first time since the funeral. She'd been so angry at him for dying, angry at him for getting on that damn horse when he'd been drinking, angry at him for leaving her with nothing but debts and a baby and a future that ended on a courthouse step. But maybe he'd left her something else too. A debt. A man who'd fought beside him and owed him a life. Patrick. Did you know? Did you know Miles Sutton would come? Of course not. Patrick was dead. He couldn't know anything anymore. There was a soft knock at the door. "Mrs. Flynn?" Miles's voice. "Mrs. Donnelly's bringing food. You need anything else?" Margaret wiped her eyes quickly. "No, thank you." A pause. "You can lock the door if you want. I'll be downstairs." She heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. After a moment, Margaret rose carefully, still cradling William, and turned the key in the lock. The small click echoed through the room. She stood there for a long moment, her hand on the key. A locked door. Such a small thing, but it meant she had a choice. Stay or go, let him in or keep him out. For the first time in 6 weeks, something was hers to decide. Mrs. Donnelly returned with a tray. Bread, cheese, cold chicken, a cup of milk, and a small bowl of stew that smelled like heaven. Margaret ate mechanically, tasting nothing at first. Then her stomach woke up and reminded her she hadn't eaten since yesterday. She devoured everything on the plate. William fell asleep in her arms, his small mouth slack, a trickle of milk at the corner of his lips. She laid him on the bed and curled around him, one arm draped protectively across his small body. Outside, the sun sank lower. Through the window, Margaret could hear the sounds of Redemption Creek settling into evening horses, neighing men's voices from the saloon, a dog barking somewhere. The same sounds as any other night. But everything was different now. She thought about Miles Sutton's face when he'd told her about Patrick singing, the way his voice had gone soft, almost tender. The ghost of a smile. He'd been telling the truth. She knew it in her bones. Which meant Patrick really had saved his life. Which meant Miles really did owe him a debt. Which meant what? That she could trust him, that he'd really bought her freedom, and nothing else Margaret didn't know. Couldn't know. Not yet. But she thought about the way he'd moved when Dutch Kearney challenged him. That stillness. That absolute certainty. Miles Sutton had killed before. She was sure of it. The war had marked him the same way it had marked Patrick. Maybe that was why Patrick had never mentioned him. Some things were too dark to bring home. Night fell. Margaret dozed fitfully, waking every time William stirred. Each time she woke, she half expected to hear footsteps in the hall. A knock at the door. A voice demanding entry. But there was nothing, just silence, and the sound of her baby breathing. Sometime past midnight, she woke to voices downstairs. Male voices, low and angry. She crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. "Don't care what you paid." That was Dutch Kearney's voice. "She's trouble. That baby's trouble. You're making a mistake." "Then it's my mistake to make." Miles calm and unmoved. "I'm warning you, Sutton. I've got friends in this town." "That's nice for you. You think you can just ride in here and—" "I think you need to leave. Now." A long pause. Then Dutch's voice, low and venomous. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Footsteps. The front door slamming. Then silence. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. She backed away from the door and climbed back into bed, pulling William close. Her hands were shaking. He came here. He followed us here. But Miles had sent him away, and Dutch had gone. For now. Margaret didn't sleep the rest of the night. She lay in the dark, listening to William breathe and thinking about tomorrow. About the ranch half a day's ride north. About what Miles Sutton expected from her. About what she would do if those expectations turned out to be different from his promises. She thought about Patrick's old hunting knife, still tucked in her bundle of belongings. She'd brought it from the house, one of the few things they'd let her keep. It wasn't much, but it was sharp. And if she had to use it, she would. When dawnlight finally crept through the window, Margaret rose stiffly. William was awake, gurgling softly and looking at the ceiling with wide, curious eyes. She changed his cloth and nursed him again, then washed her face in the basin. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror over the washstand was a stranger. Pale, hollow-eyed, with hair that needed washing and a dress that had seen better days. 24 years old, but looking 10 years older. "This is who you are now," she told her reflection. "This is what's left." There was a knock at the door. Margaret jumped. "Mrs. Flynn," Mrs. Donnelly's voice. "I've brought breakfast, and there's hot water for washing if you want it." Margaret unlocked the door. Mrs. Donnelly came in with another tray and a steaming pitcher. "How did you sleep, dear?" "Fine." Margaret lied. Mrs. Donnelly's eyes said she didn't believe it. "Miles says you'll be leaving this morning, heading to his ranch." "Yes. It's a good property. Remote but good. He runs cattle mostly. Has a Chinaman who cooks for him, fellow named Chen. Good man. Keeps the place clean." She paused. "You'll be safe there." "How do you know?" Mrs. Donnelly smiled sadly. "Because Miles Sutton is the kind of man who means what he says, and if he says you're under his protection, then you are. Dutch Kearney could bring 20 men, and it wouldn't matter. Miles would stand in front of that door and not one of them would get through." "You sound very sure." "I am sure. I've seen him do it." Margaret stared at her. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Donnelly set down the tray. 2 years ago there was a girl here. Chinese girl, maybe 15. She'd run away from a brothel in Virginia City. The owner came looking for her. Brought 4 men with him. Said she was his property, showed papers and everything. Miles was boarding here then, too. He stood on that porch and told them no. Told them she was under this roof and they weren't taking her." She paused. "They tried anyway. Miles put 3 of them in the dirt before they gave up. Sheriff wouldn't do anything, said it was a property dispute, but Miles stood his ground. That girl lives in Sacramento now, works in a laundry, safe." Margaret's throat was tight. "What happened to the brothel owner?" "He left town, never came back." Mrs. Donnelly met her eyes. "Miles Sutton doesn't start fights, but he finishes them." After Mrs. Donnelly left, Margaret ate slowly, thinking. William played with his toes, oblivious to the weight pressing down on his mother's shoulders. A man who finishes fights. She didn't know if that made her feel safer or more afraid. By the time she'd finished eating and gotten herself and William ready, the sun was well up. Margaret gathered her few belongings: a bundle of clothes, Patrick's knife, a small Bible that had been her mother's. Everything she owned in the world fit in a canvas sack. She took a last look around the room. Miles's room. A stranger's room that had been her sanctuary for one night. Thank you, she thought, though she didn't know who she was thanking. Miles. Mrs. Donnelly. God. Patrick's ghost. Maybe all of them. She unlocked the door and stepped into the hall. Miles was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He'd shaved and changed his shirt, though the exhaustion still carved lines around his eyes. His horse was saddled and waiting outside, along with a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. "That's Rosie," Miles said when he saw Margaret looking. "She's yours for the ride. Good temperament won't spook easy." "I can ride," Margaret said, then immediately felt foolish. Of course she could ride. Every woman west of the Mississippi could ride. Didn't doubt it. Miles glanced at William. "How's the little one?" "He's fine." "Good." Miles took her bundle and secured it to Rosie's saddle. "It's about 4 hours to the ranch. We'll stop halfway to rest the horses and let you feed him." "All right." Miles helped her mount his hands, careful on her waist again. She settled William in the sling she'd fashioned across her chest, his small head tucked under her chin. Miles swung up onto his own horse. "Ready?" he asked. Margaret looked back at the boarding house. Mrs. Donnelly stood in the doorway, one hand raised in farewell. Beyond her, Margaret could see the town of Redemption Creek, the place that had sold her, the place that had watched her humiliation. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." They rode north. The morning was cool and clear, the mountains sharp against a blue sky. They followed a wagon road for the first hour, passing a few other travelers, a freight wagon, a family, and a buckboard, 2 cowboys herding a small group of cattle. Everyone stared. Everyone would remember. Then Miles turned off onto a smaller trail, barely more than a track through the sagebrush. The land opened up around them, rolling hills covered in golden grass stands of aspen and pine creeks, running clear and cold. It was beautiful. Margaret had forgotten that the world could be beautiful. They rode in silence mostly. Miles wasn't much for conversation, and Margaret was too wrung out to make the effort. William dozed against her chest, lulled by the rocking motion of the horse. Around midday, Miles stopped near a creek. He helped Margaret down and spread a blanket in the shade while she nursed William. He didn't watch, didn't hover, just moved off to water the horses and give her privacy. When William was fed and drowsy again, Margaret joined Miles by the creek. He'd produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. "Not much, but it'll hold you," he said. They ate in silence. The water burbled over stones. A hawk circled overhead hunting. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said finally. "Yes, ma'am." "What happened to you after the war?" Miles was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Went home to Ohio. My parents' farm. But they died while I was gone, cholera in '63. Farm was sold for taxes. So I drifted. Worked as a ranch hand in Kansas, a deputy in Nebraska, a scout for the Army in Wyoming. Finally saved enough to buy land of my own. Found a piece up here that nobody wanted, too remote, too hard to work. Suited me fine." "You've been alone all that time." "Mostly." "That must be hard." He looked at her, then really looked at her. "Harder than being sold at auction." Margaret flinched. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." Miles stood and brushed off his pants. "We should keep moving. Want to get there before dark." They rode on. The trail climbed now, winding through foothills thick with timber. Margaret's arms ached from holding William, and her back throbbed from the long ride. But she didn't complain. Around mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Miles stopped. There, he said, pointing. Below them, in a wide valley between two mountain slopes, lay a ranch. A cabin made of logs, solid and well built. A barn, a corral, a few outbuildings. Cattle dotting the meadow, smoke rising from the chimney. Home, Miles said quietly. As they descended into the valley, a figure emerged from the cabin, a small man with a long gray braid. He shaded his eyes watching them approach. "That's Chen," Miles said. "He'll have dinner ready." They rode into the yard. Chen's eyes went from Miles to Margaret to William, and his expression didn't change at all. If he was surprised to see a woman and baby, he didn't show it. "Ah," Chen said. "You bring guests." "More than that." Miles dismounted and helped Margaret down. "Chen, this is Mrs. Margaret Flynn and her son William. They'll be staying with us." Chen studied Margaret for a long moment. Then he smiled a small, gentle smile. "Welcome," he said. "You must be tired. Come inside. I make tea." And just like that, Margaret crossed the threshold into Miles Sutton's home. The cabin was simple but clean. One large room with a fireplace, a table, a few chairs, and a ladder leading to a loft. A door led to what looked like a small bedroom. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. The smell of stew filled the air. Chen busied himself making tea while Miles showed Margaret the bedroom. "This is yours," he said. "I'll sleep in the loft. Chen has a room in the barn." Margaret looked around. A real bed with a feather mattress, a chest of drawers, a window looking out at the mountains. "I can't take your room," she said. "Yes, you can. I don't use it much anyway." Miles set her bundle on the chest. "Rest if you need to. Dinner in an hour." He left, closing the door behind him. Margaret sank onto the bed, William still clutched to her chest. Through the door she heard Miles and Chen talking in low voices. She was here, in a stranger's house, in the middle of nowhere. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something that might have been hope. Margaret woke to the sound of an axe biting wood. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was wrong. The light coming through the window fell at the wrong angle. Then William stirred beside her, and memory flooded back. Miles Sutton's ranch, the cabin in the valley, the bedroom he'd given up for her. She sat up carefully, trying not to wake the baby. Her body ached from yesterday's ride muscles protesting in places she'd forgotten could hurt. Through the window, she could see Miles in the yard splitting logs with steady, rhythmic strokes. His shirt was off despite the cool morning air, and sweat gleamed on his back. Margaret looked away quickly, heat rising to her face. It wasn't proper to watch a man like that, even if he had bought her freedom, even if she was living in his house, especially because she was living in his house. She dressed quickly and changed William's cloth, then ventured into the main room. Chen was at the stove stirring something that smelled like heaven. "Good morning," Margaret said quietly. Chen turned and smiled. "You sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." "Baby sleep too?" "Most of the night." William had only woken twice, which was a miracle. Maybe the long ride had exhausted him too. "Good, good." Chen ladled something into a bowl. "You eat. Need strength." Margaret sat at the table. The bowl contained rice porridge with bits of meat and vegetables. She'd never eaten anything like it, but she was hungry enough not to care. The first spoonful was strange on her tongue. Different spices, different textures. The second was better. By the third, she was devouring it. Chen watched with approval. "You like?" "It's wonderful." "Chinese congee, very good for new mothers." He poured her tea, the liquid, pale and fragrant. "Drink. Also good." The door opened, and Miles came in carrying an armload of split wood. He'd put his shirt back on, though it clung to his damp skin. He nodded at Margaret. "Morning." "Good morning." He stacked the wood by the fireplace, then washed his hands in the basin. Chen handed him a bowl of congee without being asked. Miles ate, standing up, his eyes on the window. Cattle look good, he said to Chen. No sign of wolves. I checked fence yesterday. All strong. Good. Margaret watched this exchange with curiosity. They talked like old friends, comfortable in their silence as much as their words. How long had Chen been here? What had brought a Chinese man to this remote valley in Montana? As if reading her thoughts, Chen caught her eye and smiled. You have questions. I don't want to pry. Is not prying, is conversation. He poured more tea. I come here 3 years ago, from railroad camp. Bad place. Many Chinese workers all treated like animals. I run away. Miles find me half dead in snow. Bring me here. Give me job, give me home. He shrugged. Now I stay. That was kind of him. Miles good man. Quiet but good. Chen glanced at Miles, who'd gone very still. He saved many people. Never talks about it. Chen, Miles said quietly, is true. That's enough. Chen smiled like he'd won a small victory. He turned back to his cooking, humming something under his breath. Margaret looked at Miles. He was staring into his bowl like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked. She thought about what Mrs. Donnelly had said about the Chinese girl, about Miles standing against 4 men, about finishing fights. Thank you, Margaret said, for everything you've done. Miles looked up surprised. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You didn't have to. Her voice caught. You could have let them sell me to Dutch Kearney. You didn't. No decent man would have. There weren't any other decent men at that auction. Miles had no answer for that. He set down his bowl and reached for his hat. I've got work to do. Fence needs mending on the north pasture. Won't be back till evening. Can I help? He paused, his hand on the door. Help. I'm not useless. I can cook, clean men clothes. I can earn my keep. Something shifted in Miles's expression. Mrs. Flynn, you don't need to earn anything. You're not here to work off a debt. Then what am I here for? The question hung between them. Miles's jaw tightened. You're here because you need a place to be. That's all. He left before Margaret could respond. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Chen made a small noise, approval or amusement, Margaret couldn't tell. He not used to people, Chen said. Been alone too long, but he try. I don't understand him. Good, that means he interesting. Chen handed her a rag. You want to help you dry dishes? I wash. So Margaret dried dishes while Chen washed, and William dozed in a basket Chen had produced from somewhere. It felt strange to be doing something so ordinary after everything that had happened. Strange and almost comforting. You have family? Chen asked. Not anymore. My parents died during the war. I had a brother, but he went west in '71. Haven't heard from him since. Margaret folded the rag carefully. Patrick was all I had left, and now he's gone too. You have baby. Baby is family. Yes. She looked at William sleeping peacefully. He's all I have now. And Miles, Chen added quietly. Margaret's hands stilled. Miles isn't family. Not yet, but maybe someday. Chen smiled at her expression. I see things. I see how he looks at you, like you puzzle he trying to solve. He barely looks at me at all. Exactly. Before Margaret could figure out what that meant, William woke up with a wail. She picked him up and retreated to the bedroom to nurse him, her mind spinning. Like you puzzle he trying to solve. What did that mean? Miles had made it clear she wasn't here to be his wife. Wasn't here to be anything except safe. So why did Chen think? Margaret shook her head. It didn't matter. She couldn't afford to think about things like that. Couldn't afford to imagine a future beyond the next few weeks. She needed to figure out what came next. Where she would go. How she would survive. But every time she tried to picture leaving this place, her mind went blank. The days fell into a rhythm. Miles left early each morning to work the ranch. Chen cooked and cleaned and tended the vegetable garden behind the cabin. Margaret helped where she could, washing clothes, mending torn shirts, keeping the cabin tidy. William grew more alert, his eyes following movements, his small hands reaching for everything. Miles stayed distant, polite but distant. He ate dinner with them each night, answered questions when asked, but volunteered little. He never touched Margaret, never came too close, always left space between them like an invisible wall. Margaret told herself she was grateful, told herself this distance meant she was safe. But sometimes late at night when William finally slept and the cabin creaked in the wind, she felt terribly, desperately lonely. A week passed, then another. Autumn crept closer, the mornings sharp with frost, the aspens beginning to turn gold. Margaret fell into the work without thinking about it, cooking breakfast, while Chen prepared the animals' feed, hanging laundry on the line, singing quietly to William while he played on a blanket in the sun. She tried not to think about Redemption Creek. Tried not to wonder if Dutch Kearney was still angry. Tried not to remember the faces of the men who'd bid on her like she was livestock. But sometimes at night, she heard hoofbeats in her dreams and woke gasping, her heart hammering, only to realize it was just the wind in the pines. On a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after she'd arrived, Miles came back from checking the cattle earlier than usual. His face was set, his movements tight with tension. "What's wrong?" Margaret asked. "Nothing." "You're lying." He shot her a look, surprised. Then something like respect flickered across his face. There were tracks on the north boundary. 3 riders, maybe 4. Too deliberate to be drifters. Margaret's stomach dropped. "You think they're looking for this place?" "Maybe. Or maybe they're just passing through." But his hand rested on his revolver, like he didn't believe his own words. Chen appeared in the doorway, his face unusually serious. "We prepare—" "Yeah, check the rifle. Make sure there's ammunition in the cabin and the barn." Miles turned to Margaret. "You know how to shoot?" "Patrick taught me." "Good. There's a Winchester in the bedroom. It's loaded. If anyone comes while I'm out, anyone who's not Chen or me, you lock that door and you don't open it. Understand?" "You think Dutch Kearney would come here?" "I think Dutch Kearney is the kind of man who doesn't like losing." Miles's eyes were hard. "And I think he's stupid enough to try something." "Then maybe I should leave. Go somewhere else. I don't want to bring trouble to—" "No." The word was flat, absolute. Margaret stared at him. "You're not leaving?" Miles said. "You're not running. You're under my protection, and that means something." He paused. "I made you a promise, Mrs. Flynn. I don't break promises." Something in his voice made Margaret's throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Miles left again, this time with a rifle across his saddle. Margaret watched him ride toward the northern hills, her stomach churning with worry. "He be fine," Chen said quietly beside her. "Miles very good at staying alive." "How do you know?" "Because men like Miles, men who survive wars, they learn to see danger coming." Chen touched her arm gently. "He keep you safe. He keep all of us safe." Margaret wanted to believe him, but she'd heard the certainty in Miles's voice when he'd said Dutch Kearney would try something, and she knew in her bones that this quiet peace couldn't last. That night, Miles didn't come back for dinner. Margaret paced the cabin, William fussing in her arms, while Chen pretended not to notice her anxiety. She kept glancing at the Winchester propped in the corner of the bedroom, its presence both reassuring and terrifying. The sun set. Shadows crept across the valley. Still no sign of Miles. "He fine," Chen said again, but even he sounded less certain now. Margaret put William to bed and sat by the window watching the darkness. An owl called somewhere in the trees. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Then, finally, hoofbeats. Margaret grabbed the rifle and moved to the door. Chen already had his shotgun in hand. "Miles!" she called. It's me! Relief flooded through her. She opened the door. Miles dismounted heavily, exhaustion carved into every line of his body. Blood stained his sleeve. "You're hurt," Margaret said. "It's nothing." "Let me see." "Mrs. Flynn." "Sit down." Her voice came out sharper than she'd intended. "Please." Miles hesitated, then sank into a chair. Margaret rolled up his sleeve carefully. A long gash ran along his forearm, deep enough to need stitches. "What happened?" "Ran into some men. They had questions about whether I was harboring a certain widow." Margaret's hand stilled. "Dutch Kearney sent them." "Didn't give their names. Didn't need to." "What did you tell them?" "That they were trespassing. That they needed to leave." Miles's jaw tightened. "They didn't want to listen." "So you made them listen." "Something like that." Chen brought hot water and clean cloths. Margaret cleaned the wound as gently as she could, but Miles still flinched. His skin was warm under her fingers, his muscles taut. "This needs stitches," she said. "I've had worse." "That's not the point." Margaret threaded a needle with steady hands. "This is going to hurt." "I know." She worked quickly, her stitches neat and even. Patrick had taught her this too during their first winter when money was tight and the doctor was 2 days' ride away. Miles didn't make a sound, but she felt him tense with each pull of the thread. "There," she said finally. "Keep it clean. Change the bandage every day." "Yes, ma'am." Their eyes met. In the lamplight, his face looked younger, somehow more vulnerable. Margaret was suddenly aware of how close they were, her hand still resting on his arm. She pulled back quickly. "You should eat something." "Not hungry." "You need to keep your strength up." "Mrs. Flynn." "Margaret." The word came out before she could stop it. "You can call me Margaret." Miles stared at her. Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or something deeper. "Margaret," he said quietly. "You should get some rest. So should you." "I will. After I check the barn one more time." "Miles." She waited until he looked at her. "Thank you. For protecting us." He stood, moved toward the door, then paused. "Those men won't come back. I made sure of that." His voice was soft. "But Dutch Kearney, he's not done. Not yet." "What will he do?" "Don't know. But whatever it is, we'll be ready." After he left, Margaret sat at the table, her hands shaking now that the crisis had passed. Chen brought her tea without comment. "You did good," he said. "Very steady hands." "I was terrified." "Brave and terrified look same from outside." Chen smiled. "Miles, see how brave you are. Is good." Margaret didn't know what to say to that. She sipped her tea and thought about the blood on Miles's arm, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he'd said her name, Margaret, like he was trying it out, seeing how it felt in his mouth. She thought about his promise, his absolute certainty that she was under his protection, the way he'd ridden out today to face men who wanted to hurt her and come back bleeding but victorious. "I don't break promises." Margaret believed him, and that belief was the most dangerous thing of all. The next morning, Miles appeared at breakfast with his arm properly bandaged. He ate quickly, not quite meeting Margaret's eyes, then headed back out to work. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible wall had cracked. Over the following days, Miles started staying closer to the cabin. He found excuses to work on the barn roof, to repair the corral fence, to chop wood within sight of the house. Margaret understood. He was watching, waiting, and she was grateful even if she couldn't quite say it. One afternoon, while William napped, Margaret ventured outside to the small vegetable garden. Chen had taught her which plants needed harvesting, which needed water. The work was simple, but satisfying. She liked the feel of dirt under her fingernails, the smell of tomato vines, the weight of squash in her hands. She was pulling weeds when she heard footsteps behind her. "You're good at that," Miles said. Margaret jumped. She hadn't heard him approach. "You startled me." "Sorry." He crouched beside her, examining the garden. Chen says you've got a knack for growing things. My mother had a garden. She taught me when I was small. Margaret brushed dirt from her hands. Before the war came and destroyed everything. War destroys a lot of things. Yes. She glanced at him. Is that why you came west, to get away from what the war destroyed? Miles was quiet for a long moment. Then, the war took my family, my home, the person I thought I was. He pulled a weed absently. Out here, none of that matters. No one knows who you were. They only see who you are now. And who are you now? He met her eyes. I'm still figuring that out. Margaret understood. She was still figuring out who she was too. Not Patrick's wife anymore. Not the girl from Ohio. Not the woman sold at auction. Someone new. Someone being born in the quiet of this valley, in the rhythm of work and survival. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Why didn't you ever marry Mrs. Donnelly? Mentioned someone Rebecca Wilson. Miles' expression closed. That was a long time ago. But she mattered to you. Once, before I knew better. He stood brushing dirt from his knees. Rebecca wanted a husband who'd live in town, who'd run a store or practice law, who'd go to church on Sundays and host dinner parties. He gestured at the valley around them. I couldn't be that man. Tried for a while, made us both miserable. So you came here. So I came here. Miles looked at the mountains. This is where I belong, this land, this silence. Rebecca couldn't understand that. Maybe nobody can. I can, Margaret said quietly. He looked at her sharply. What? I understand. About belonging to a place, about needing silence. She stood facing him. Patrick wanted to build an empire, always talking about expansion, about making something of himself. He couldn't just be. He always had to be becoming. Her throat tightened. It's exhausting living with someone who's never satisfied. You loved him. I did, but I didn't always like him. The admission felt like betrayal. Is that terrible? It's honest. Miles's voice was gentle. Love isn't always enough. Sometimes you need understanding too. Their eyes held. Margaret felt something shift inside her chest. Recognition maybe, or connection. This man understood things about her that Patrick never had. Understood the need for quiet, the comfort of work, the beauty of a life lived small and true. Miles, Margaret. Chen's voice sharp with alarm. They turned as one. Chen was running from the cabin, his face pale. What's wrong? Miles was already moving his hand on his revolver. Rider coming, fast. Miles swore under his breath. Get inside, both of you. Lock the door. Miles. Now. Margaret ran. Chen grabbed her arm and pulled her into the cabin. She snatched up William, who'd woken crying, and Chen barred the door. Through the window, Margaret saw a rider appear at the edge of the trees. Not Dutch Kearney. Someone younger, dressed in range clothes, his horse lathered from hard riding. Miles stood in the yard, his rifle across his arms, waiting. The rider reined in, hands carefully visible. Miles Sutton. Who's asking? Name's Tom Fletcher. I work for Samuel Hayes in Redemption Creek. Hayes the banker. Yes, sir. Fletcher glanced nervously at the rifle. I'm not here for trouble. Mr. Hayes sent me with a message. I'm listening. Dutch Kearney's making noise in town, talking about how you stole his property, how you're harboring a criminal. Fletcher shifted in his saddle. Mr. Hayes thought you should know. Kearney's gathering men, maybe 10, maybe more. Margaret's breath stopped. 10 men. When? Miles asked, his voice cold. Don't know exactly, but soon. Day or two, maybe. Fletcher looked miserable. Mr. Hayes says he can't stop it. Kearney owns too many debts in that town. Men do what he says. Why is Hayes telling me this? Because he's a decent man who doesn't like seeing people hurt for no reason. Fletcher gathered his reins. That's all I know. Mr. Hayes said to tell you. He paused. He said you should consider sending the woman away. Somewhere Kearney can't find her. That it's the only way this ends without blood. You go back and tell Hayes I appreciate the warning, Miles said, but the woman stays. Anyone who comes here looking for trouble will find it. Fletcher nodded like he'd expected that answer. Good luck, Mr. Sutton. You're going to need it. He wheeled his horse and galloped away. Miles stood in the yard for a long moment staring after him. Then he turned back to the cabin. His face was set like stone. Margaret opened the door. Miles? I need to go to town. What? No, you can't. I'm not going to sit here and wait for Kearney to bring a war to my doorstep. Miles was already moving, grabbing his saddlebags, checking his weapons. I'll end this before it starts. He'll kill you. 10 men against 1. Won't be a fair fight, I know. Miles looked at her, and his eyes were terrible. But I've survived worse odds. Let me come with you. No. Miles. You stay here. You and William stay here where it's safe. Chen will protect you. He turned to Chen. Anything happens to them, anything at all. Nothing will happen, Chen said quietly. I promise. Miles looked at Margaret one more time. Something passed between them. Fear, determination, and something else. Something that made Margaret's chest ache. I'll be back, he said. You'd better be. He almost smiled. Then he was gone, riding hard toward Redemption Creek and whatever waited for him there. Margaret stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared into the trees. Her arms tightened around William. He going to be all right? She asked Chen. Chen didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was troubled. Miles very good at violence. But 10 men. He shook his head. We pray he come back. But Margaret knew prayer wasn't always enough. She spent the rest of that day in a haze of fear. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a rider. William fussed, picking up on her tension, and nothing she did could soothe him. Night fell. Still no sign of Miles. Chen moved his bedroll inside, sleeping by the door, with his shotgun across his chest. Margaret lay awake in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling, imagining all the ways Miles could die. 10 men. How could one man stand against 10? Even Miles with his cold eyes and his quiet violence. Even Miles who'd survived the war and everything after. She thought about his face when he'd said her name. Thought about the way he'd crouched beside her in the garden, pulling weeds like it was the most natural thing in the world. Thought about his promise. I don't break promises, and wondered if death could break a promise made in good faith. Dawn came gray and cold. Margaret rose exhausted and made coffee with shaking hands. Chen said nothing, just handed her a bowl of rice that she couldn't eat. Mid-morning, William finally fell asleep. Margaret stood at the window watching the trail, willing a rider to appear. And then, impossibly, he did. Miles rode into the yard at noon, slumped in his saddle, his horse moving slow. Margaret ran outside, her heart in her throat. Miles. He slid from the saddle and nearly fell. Margaret caught him staggering under his weight. Chen appeared, and together they got him inside. Blood. There was so much blood. His shirt was torn, his face bruised, his knuckles split and raw. What happened? Margaret demanded, her hands already reaching for bandages. Ended it, Miles said through swollen lips. Dutch Kearney won't bother you again. Did you kill him? Didn't have to. Broke his jaw, broke his pride. He'll think twice before... Miles winced as Margaret pressed cloth to a gash on his ribs. He'll think twice. And the other men? Scattered when they saw what happened to their boss. Miles closed his eyes. It's over, Margaret. It's over. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel relief, but all she felt was terror at how close she'd come to losing him. You're an idiot, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. A stupid, reckless idiot. Probably. You could have died. But I didn't. Miles opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her. I came back. Like I promised. Margaret couldn't speak. She just bent over his wounds and started cleaning them. Her hands shaking. Her vision blurred with tears she couldn't stop. And Miles let her. Let her touch him, care for him, piece him back together. Let her see him broken and vulnerable and human. When she'd finished bandaging him, when Chen had helped him to his loft, when William was nursing peacefully and the cabin had fallen quiet, Margaret finally let herself break. She went outside and sank onto the porch steps and cried. For Patrick. For herself. For Miles and his bleeding knuckles and his stupid bravery. For everything she'd lost and everything she was terrified of losing. She cried until she had nothing left. Then she dried her eyes, stood up, and went back inside. Because Miles Sutton had kept his promise. And somehow, without meaning to, she'd started to believe in promises again. Miles spent 3 days recovering in the loft, moving like an old man when he finally came down. His face was mottled purple and yellow, his ribs wrapped tight, but his eyes were clear. Margaret watched him descend the ladder with her heart in her throat, ready to catch him if he fell. "I'm fine," he said before she could ask. "You're not fine. You can barely move." "I can move enough." He made it to the table and sat heavily. Chen appeared with tea, and Miles took it without argument, which told Margaret more about his condition than any words could. "You need to rest," she said. "Cattle don't care if I'm hurt. Chen can handle the cattle for a few more days. Margaret, don't argue with me." She set a bowl of stew in front of him, harder than necessary. "You nearly died. The least you can do is heal properly." Miles looked at her for a long moment. Then something like amusement flickered across his battered face. "Yes, ma'am." She turned away before he could see her flush. She wasn't sure when she'd started giving him orders. Wasn't sure when he'd started listening. But something had changed between them on that porch 3 days ago, when she'd cried for him, when she'd realized how much it would destroy her if he didn't come back. That terrified her more than Dutch Kearney ever had. Over the next week, Miles healed slowly. Margaret changed his bandages morning and night, her fingers gentle on his bruised skin. He never complained, never flinched away from her touch, just watched her with those gray eyes while she worked like he was trying to memorize something. "You're good at this," he said one evening while she rewrapped his ribs. "I've had practice. Patrick was always getting hurt." Margaret's hands stilled. "He was reckless. Like you." "I'm not reckless." "You rode into town to face 10 men alone. That's the definition of reckless." "What would you have had me do? Wait for them to come here, put you and William in danger. I would have had you stay alive." The words came out sharper than she intended. "What good is your protection if you're dead?" Miles caught her wrist, stopping her movements. His grip was gentle but firm. "I'm not dead." "You could have been." "But I'm not." He was close enough that she could see the green flecks in his gray eyes, close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin through the bandages. "I'm right here." Margaret pulled away, her heart hammering. "You should rest." "Margaret, please." She couldn't look at him. "Just rest." She retreated to the bedroom and closed the door, pressing her back against it. Her hands were shaking. What was wrong with her? She'd been married. She'd loved Patrick. She knew what attraction felt like. But this was different. This was dangerous. Because Miles Sutton was a good man, and she was living in his house, and she couldn't afford to confuse gratitude with something else. Couldn't afford to imagine a future that didn't exist. Patrick had been dead barely 2 months. 2 months. What kind of woman felt this way so soon? A desperate one, her mind whispered. A lonely one. William whimpered from his basket, and Margaret picked him up, grateful for the distraction. She nursed him and sang softly, trying not to think about the man in the other room. trying not to remember the feel of his skin under her fingers, the way he'd said her name. But that night, lying in Miles's bed, she couldn't escape him. The room smelled like him leather and sage, and something else, something uniquely his. His books were on the shelf, his clothes in the chest, his whole life contained in this small space, and she was sleeping in the middle of it. She thought about Rebecca Wilson, the woman who'd wanted Miles to live in town, the woman who'd wanted him to be someone he wasn't. Margaret understood why he'd left. Some people weren't meant for parlors and dinner parties. Some people needed sky and silence and the freedom to be alone. But being alone was different from being lonely. And Miles was the loneliest man she'd ever met. "So are you?" her mind whispered. Margaret closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep. The next morning brought the first real snow of the season. Margaret woke to find the world transformed, everything soft and white and hushed. William was fascinated by the flakes drifting past the window, his small hands reaching for something he couldn't touch. "First snow," Chen said, appearing beside her. "Winter come early this year." "Is that bad?" "Depend. If we have enough food, enough wood, we be fine. If not," he shrugged, "we be cold and hungry." "Do we have enough?" "We see." But his expression was troubled. Miles came down the ladder, moving better today, though he still favored his ribs. He looked out the window, and his jaw tightened. "I need to check the herd, make sure they're not scattered." "You're not healed enough to—" "I'm healed enough." He pulled on his coat. "Chen, you come with me. We'll bring them closer to the barn." "I help too," Chen said. Miles glanced at Margaret. "You'll be all right here." "We'll be fine." "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but Chen or me." "I know." He hesitated like he wanted to say something else. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a gust of cold air. Margaret spent the day restless. She cleaned things that were already clean. She mended clothes that didn't need mending. She played with William until he fell asleep exhausted from laughing at her silly faces. But her mind kept wandering to Miles out in the snow, to his bruised ribs and his stubborn insistence on working, to the way he'd looked at her last night when she'd touched his skin. Stop it, she told herself. Just stop. But she couldn't. Miles and Chen returned at dusk, covered in snow, their faces red from cold. They'd brought the cattle down from the high pasture, Miles reported. Everything was secure for the winter. Margaret made a stew thick with vegetables and dumplings, something her mother used to make on cold nights. Miles ate 2 bowls and Chen 3. When they were finished, Chen retired to the barn and Margaret began washing dishes. Miles stayed at the table staring into his coffee cup like it held answers. "You should rest," Margaret said without turning around. "I'm tired of resting." "Your body needs time to heal." "My body's fine." He paused. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" Her hands stilled in the dishwater. "Yes." "Why did you marry Patrick?" The question surprised her. She dried her hands, slowly thinking. "I was 18. My parents had just died. Patrick was kind to me. He promised me a future when I had none." She turned to face him. "I thought that was love. But it wasn't. It was something. Gratitude, maybe. Security. Patrick was a good man, but we were never—" She searched for the right word. "We were never truly matched. We wanted different things, dreamed different dreams." "Do you regret it?" Margaret looked at William asleep in his basket. "I can't regret something that gave me my son, but would I make the same choice again?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe not." Miles was quiet for a long time. Then, "I was engaged once, before Rebecca, during the war." Margaret's breath caught. She hadn't known. "Her name was Sarah. I met her in Tennessee. She was a nurse in the hospital where they took me after Shiloh." Miles's voice was distant, like he was speaking from somewhere far away. "She was beautiful, kind, everything good in a world that had forgotten goodness." "What happened?" I went back to the front, promised I'd return for her after the war. His jaw tightened. She died of typhoid 3 months later. I didn't find out until Appomattox. Miles, I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. He looked at her, then really looked at her. No, it doesn't. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Margaret wanted to go to him, wanted to touch his face, smooth away the pain carved into his features, wanted to tell him she understood that kind of loss, that kind of regret. But she stayed where she was, her hands gripping the edge of the basin. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because I want you to understand. I'm not good at this, at people at talking. Rebecca was right about that. I've been alone so long I've forgotten how to be anything else. He stood, moved closer. But you and William being here, it's changed something. And I don't know what to do with that. Margaret's heart was hammering. Miles, I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining that careful distance. You're not a burden. You're not charity. He struggled for words. You're the first thing in 15 years that's felt like it might be home. The words hung in the air between them. Margaret couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Say something, Miles said quietly. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Just don't leave. Not yet. I'm not leaving. Promise me. She thought about his other promises, the ones he'd kept even when they'd cost him blood. I promise. Relief flickered across his face. Then he turned away, moving toward the ladder. Good night, Margaret. Good night. She watched him climb to the loft, her mind spinning. Then she retreated to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, shaking. You're the first thing in 15 years that's felt like it might be home. What did that mean? What was he asking for? What did she want him to be asking for? Margaret didn't know, didn't trust herself to know. But that night, for the first time since Patrick died, she didn't cry herself to sleep. She just lay in the darkness, listening to the sound of Miles moving in the loft above her, and felt something that might have been peace. The snow kept falling. By morning, it was 6 inches deep and still coming down. Miles went out to feed the animals and came back covered in white, his breath steaming. We're snowed in, he announced. Won't be able to get to town for at least a week. Is that a problem? Not if you don't mind my company. Margaret surprised herself by smiling. I think I can manage. Something lit in Miles's eyes, surprise maybe, or pleasure. Good. The enforced closeness changed things. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but survive the storm, they fell into a different rhythm. Miles taught Margaret to play chess while William napped. Chen taught them both a Chinese card game that involved a lot of shouting and laughter. They cooked together, ate together, sat by the fire together while the wind howled outside. Miles started talking more. Small things at first, stories about the ranch, about the land, about the animals. Then bigger things, about the war, about the men he'd lost, about the nightmares that still woke him some nights, gasping and reaching for weapons that weren't there. Margaret talked too, about growing up in Ohio, about her mother's garden and her father's quiet strength, about Patrick's dreams and his failures, about the auction and the shame that still burned in her chest when she thought about it. It wasn't your fault, Miles said one night. I know that. But knowing and feeling are different things. Yeah. He stared into the fire. They are. On the 4th day of the storm, William developed a fever. Margaret spent the night pacing with him, trying everything she could think of. Cool cloths, nursing, rocking. Nothing worked. He wailed and burned against her chest, his small face flushed and miserable. Miles came down from the loft at dawn to find Margaret in tears, still pacing. Let me try, he said quietly. Margaret was too exhausted to argue. She handed William over and sank into a chair, her arms aching. Miles held the baby awkwardly at first, then with more confidence. He started humming some tuneless melody that might have been a marching song. William's cries quieted to whimpers. Miles kept humming, swaying gently and impossibly miraculously. William fell asleep. Margaret stared. "How did you—" "I don't know." Miles looked down at the sleeping baby with wonder. Maybe he was just tired. He's been crying for 6 hours. Then maybe he just needed someone different. Miles carried William to the basket and laid him down carefully like he was handling something infinitely precious. When he straightened, his eyes met Margaret's. "You should rest." "I can't. If he wakes up, I'll watch him. Go sleep." "Miles, please." His voice was gentle. "You're exhausted. Let me help." Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle her own child, but exhaustion won. She stumbled to the bedroom and collapsed on the bed without even removing her shoes. She woke hours later to afternoon light and blessed silence. She emerged from the bedroom to find Miles asleep in the chair by the fire, William sleeping peacefully in his arms. Chen was making tea, his expression soft as he looked at them. "He good man," Chen whispered. "He make good father." Margaret's throat closed. She looked at Miles's face, relaxed in sleep, vulnerable. Looked at her son, cradled against his chest. Looked at the future she was terrified to want. "Yes," she whispered back. He would. William's fever broke that night. By morning he was back to his normal self, gurgling and reaching for everything. Margaret felt like she could breathe again. "Thank you," she said to Miles over breakfast. "For last night." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Miles set down his coffee cup. "He's a good kid. Patrick would be proud." The mention of Patrick created a small, awkward silence. Margaret pushed eggs around her plate. "I think about him less now," she said quietly. "Is that terrible? It's human. It's only been 2 months. Grief doesn't follow a schedule, Margaret. You loved him. You lost him. But life keeps going. That's not betrayal. That's survival." She looked at him across the table. "Is that what you tell yourself about Sarah?" Miles flinched. "Sometimes." "Does it help?" "Not really." He managed a small smile. "But I keep saying it anyway." Margaret laughed despite herself. It felt good to laugh. Felt like maybe she was allowed to be happy again, even if only for a moment. The storm finally broke on the 7th day. Margaret woke to brilliant sunshine reflecting off snow, everything diamond bright and achingly beautiful. Miles and Chen dug paths to the barn and the corral. Margaret hung laundry on the line, watching the sheets snap in the cold wind. That night, Miles announced he needed to ride to town. Check on supplies, make sure Dutch Kearney was keeping his distance. "I'm coming with you," Margaret said. "Margaret." "I'm not asking, I'm telling you." She crossed her arms. "I can't hide here forever. I need to face that town eventually. Might as well be now." Miles looked like he wanted to argue. Then he nodded. "All right, but William stays here with Chen." Agreed. The next morning, they left William with Chen and rode toward Redemption Creek. Margaret hadn't been back since the auction. Her stomach churned as the town came into view. "You sure about this?" Miles asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They rode down Main Street at mid-morning. People stopped to stare. Margaret kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Miles took her to the general store. Inside, Mrs. Patterson, behind the counter, went pale. "Mrs. Flynn?" she stammered. "I didn't expect—" "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson." Margaret's voice was steady. "I need supplies. Flour, sugar, coffee. And some cloth if you have it. Blue calico if possible." Mrs. Patterson's eyes darted to Miles, then back to Margaret. "Of course. Right away." While she gathered the supplies, other customers filtered in. Margaret felt their eyes on her back, heard their whispers. That's the widow. Sutton bought her. Wonder if she's earning her keep. Margaret's hands clenched. Miles moved closer, his presence a silent warning. The whispers stopped. Mrs. Patterson wrapped the supplies with shaking hands. That'll be $6. Miles paid, and they loaded everything onto the horses. As they prepared to leave, a woman approached. Not Rebecca Wilson, but someone else younger with kind eyes. Mrs. Flynn, I'm Sarah Mitchell. I just wanted to say... She glanced nervously at Miles. What happened to you wasn't right. And what Mr. Sutton did was brave. She pressed something into Margaret's hand. This is for your baby. For William. Margaret looked down. A small carved wooden rattle, beautiful in its simplicity. Thank you, Margaret whispered. Sarah nodded and hurried away. Margaret clutched the rattle, tears stinging her eyes. One kind voice. One person who saw her as human instead of scandal. It was enough. They rode out of town in silence. Halfway home, Miles stopped his horse. You did good back there, he said. I was terrified. I know. You did it anyway. That's courage. Margaret looked at him, at his serious face and his gray eyes and the way he sat his horse like he was born to it. You make me braver than I am. No. I just stand beside you while you remember you were brave all along. Something broke open in Margaret's chest. Before she could think, before she could stop herself, she said, Miles, Wait. He held up a hand. Before you say anything, I need to tell you something. He took a breath. The Founders' Day Festival is in 2 weeks. People from all over come to Redemption Creek. There'll be dancing, music, food. He paused. I'd like to take you, if you want. Margaret stared. You're asking me to a dance. I'm asking if you'd let me court you, properly, the way you deserve. Miles's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his nervousness. I know it's soon. I know Patrick just died. And I know I'm not much, just a rancher with a remote piece of land and more silence than conversation. But I care about you, Margaret. About you and William both. And I want... He stopped, struggling for words. I want to see if this thing between us might be real. Margaret couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her mind was screaming that it was too soon, too fast, too dangerous. But her heart was saying yes. I need time, she whispered. Miles nodded, disappointment flickering across his face. Of course. No, I mean... She urged her horse closer. I mean, I need time to be sure this is what I want. Not because I'm grateful, not because I'm scared, but because it's real. She met his eyes. Because you're real, and this matters too much to rush. Understanding dawned on Miles's face. How much time until the festival? 2 weeks. Margaret managed a shaky smile. If you still want me, then if I still want this, you can take me to that dance. And if you don't, then we'll figure something else out. She paused. But Miles, I think I will. Want it, I mean. I think I already do. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. Then I'll wait. They rode home through the snow, and everything felt different. The air was crisper, the mountains more beautiful, the future less terrifying. Margaret didn't know what would happen in 2 weeks. Didn't know if she could really let herself love again so soon. Didn't know if she deserved this second chance at happiness. But she knew Miles Sutton was patient. Knew he would wait for her answer. Knew that whatever happened, he would keep his promises. And that was enough to build hope on. For now, that was enough. The 2 weeks that followed felt like holding her breath underwater. Margaret woke each morning knowing she was moving toward a decision that would change everything. Miles was careful around her, maintaining that respectful distance, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart stutter. Chen noticed, of course. He noticed everything. You very quiet, he said one afternoon while they prepared vegetables. You thinking too much. I have a lot to think about. You think about Miles. It wasn't a question. Margaret's hands stilled on the knife. Is it that obvious? To me, yes. To Miles, maybe not. He not good at seeing what right in front of him. Chen smiled. He asked you to festival. How did you? I hear things. Cabin not that big. Chen's expression turned serious. You afraid? Terrified. Of Miles. No, of myself. Of wanting something I'm not sure I should want. Margaret set down the knife. Patrick's only been dead 2 months. What kind of woman moves on so quickly? The kind who's still alive, Chen said simply. The kind who allowed to be happy. It feels like betrayal. You know what betrayal is. Betrayal is giving up on life because death came too soon. Patrick would want you happy. He was soldier. Soldiers know life too short to waste. Margaret's eyes burned. You didn't know Patrick. No, but I know Miles, and Miles loved Patrick like brother. You think Miles betray his memory? Never. Chen touched her hand gently. Miles see you. Really see you. Not many men do that. Not even husbands. The words settled in Margaret's chest, true and uncomfortable. Patrick had loved her, but had he really seen her? Or had he seen the life he wanted to build with her as a piece of it? She thought about Miles, about the way he'd given her his room without question, the way he'd fought for her safety, the way he held William like the baby was made of glass and starlight, the way he listened when she talked, really listened like her words mattered. I think I'm falling in love with him, she whispered. Chen grinned. I know. Whole valley knows. Only person who not know is Miles. That can't be true. He asked me to the festival. Because he desperate and brave and little bit stupid about feelings. Chen laughed at her expression. Is good combination for husband. Means he try hard. Means he care enough to be scared. Margaret wanted to argue, but William chose that moment to wake from his nap with a wail. She picked him up and carried him to the window. Outside, Miles was working with one of the horses, patient and gentle as always. The horse had been wild when Miles bought it, half-starved and mean. Now it ate from his hand. Everything Miles touched, he healed. Could he heal her too? Could he help her put back together the pieces Patrick's death had shattered? Or are you just using him? Her mind whispered. Using his strength because you're too weak to stand alone. The thought made her sick. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to be someone who needed saving. But maybe that was the wrong question. Maybe the real question was whether she could offer Miles something too, whether this could be partnership instead of rescue. That night after dinner, Miles lingered at the table while Chen retreated to the barn. Margaret cleaned dishes, hyper-aware of his presence behind her. Can I ask you something? Miles said quietly. Margaret's hands stilled in the dishwater. Yes. Are you having second thoughts about the festival? She dried her hands slowly and turned to face him. I'm having 1,000 thoughts, but not second ones. Relief flickered across his face. I don't want to push you. If you need more time. 2 weeks was my idea, remember? I know, but I also know what people in town are saying. About us. About you. His jaw tightened. If being seen with me makes things harder, let them talk. Margaret surprised herself with the fierceness in her voice. I'm tired of living my life according to what people think. That's what got me sold at auction, trying to be respectable, trying to do everything right. She moved closer. You know what I learned that day? Respectability doesn't protect you. Money doesn't protect you. The only thing that protects you is people who actually give a damn. Miles stood, closing the distance between them. I give a damn. I know you do. That's why I'm not having second thoughts. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. But I'm scared, Miles. Scared of wanting this too much. Scared of what it means. Scared that I'm betraying Patrick by feeling this way so soon. You're not betraying anyone. How can you be sure? Because I know what betrayal looks like. I've done it. I've seen it. This, he gestured between them. This is just two people trying not to be alone anymore. There's no betrayal in that, just survival. Margaret's throat was tight. Is that what this is to you, survival? Miles was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. No. It stopped being just survival the day you stitched up my arm and yelled at me for being reckless. It stopped being survival when I heard you singing to William at 3 a.m. When I watched you walk into that store with your head high, even though you were terrified. He paused. This is me wanting to wake up to something besides emptiness. This is me thinking maybe I could be someone's home again. Margaret couldn't breathe. The words hung between them, honest and raw and terrifying. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to let someone in again. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. What if I can't be what you need? Miles reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face. His hand was warm and calloused, and infinitely gentle. Margaret, you already are. She leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. Closed her eyes and let herself feel it, the tenderness, the promise, the possibility of something new growing from the ashes of everything she'd lost. When she opened her eyes, Miles was watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. The festival, she said. I'll go with you. You're sure? No, but I'm going anyway. Miles smiled, then really smiled, and Margaret felt something inside her shift and settle. This was right. Terrifying, but right. I should warn you, Miles said. I'm not much of a dancer. Neither am I. Then we'll be terrible together. Margaret laughed despite herself. That sounds perfect. The days until the festival flew by. Margaret found herself humming while she worked, caught herself smiling at nothing. Chen watched her with knowing eyes, but said nothing. Miles was quieter than usual, almost shy, like he couldn't quite believe she'd said yes. 3 days before the festival, Margaret pulled out the blue calico cloth Miles had bought her in town. She'd been saving it, not sure what to make. Now she knew. She worked late into the nights, sewing by lamplight while William slept. Her fingers remembered her mother's lessons, how to cut on the bias, how to gather fabric, just so, how to make something beautiful from simple materials. Chen discovered her one night and immediately appointed himself assistant. He had an eye for detail that surprised her, catching mistakes before she made them, suggesting adjustments that improved the fit. You learned to sew in railroad camp? Margaret asked. I learned to sew before that. In China, I work for tailor. Very fancy shop. Make clothes for rich men. His expression grew distant. Then my family need money. Brother gets sick. I come to America for work. Send money home. He shrugged. Never make it back. Your family, are they? I don't know. Letters stopped coming 5 years ago. Maybe they alive. Maybe not. Chen's hands were steady on the fabric. I make peace with not knowing, is all I can do. Margaret thought about her own brother disappeared somewhere in California, about all the families the West had broken apart in its promise of something better. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be sorry. Be grateful. You have baby. You have Miles. You have chance for new life. Chen met her eyes. Not everyone gets second chance. You getting one. Don't waste it. The words stayed with her as she finished the dress. Don't waste it. How many people would give anything for another chance at happiness? And here she was being offered exactly that, and half terrified to take it. The morning of the festival, Margaret woke to butterflies in her stomach. She dressed carefully in the blue calico dress, her hands shaking on the buttons. The dress fit perfectly, the color bringing out the blue in her eyes. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not the widow from the auction. Not Patrick's wife. Someone new. Someone being born. She emerged from the bedroom to find Miles waiting by the door, dressed in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing. He looked at her and went very still. Margaret, he breathed. You look... It's too much, isn't it? I should have worn something simpler. No. Miles crossed to her in 3 strides. You look beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Heat rose to her face. Thank you. William chose that moment to spit up on Chen's shoulder. Chen didn't even flinch, just wiped it off with a cloth. You two go, he said, shooing them toward the door. Have fun. Dance. I take care of baby. We be fine. Are you sure? Margaret asked. He's been fussy. I raised 3 sons in China. I know about fussy babies. Chen smiled. Go, enjoy. Come back tomorrow if you want. We manage. Margaret kissed William's forehead, breathing in his baby smell. Be good for Chen. Miles helped her onto the gentle mare, then swung up onto his own horse. They rode toward Redemption Creek in comfortable silence, the autumn sun warm on their shoulders. As they got closer, Margaret's anxiety returned. What if people stare? They will stare. What if they say things? They'll say things. Miles glanced at her. But they'll say them to empty air because we won't be listening. You make it sound simple. It is simple, just not easy. He paused. Margaret, we can turn back right now if you want. I won't be angry. Won't be disappointed. Your comfort matters more than some dance. Margaret thought about it, really thought about it. About going back to the safety of the cabin. About hiding from the whispers and the judgment. Then she thought about what Chen had said. About second chances. About not wasting them. No, she said. I want to go. I want people to see that I'm not ashamed. That what happened to me wasn't my fault. And that Miles Sutton is... She paused, surprised by her own courage. That Miles Sutton is the best man I've ever known. Miles's eyes were bright. You don't have to say that. I know. I'm saying it anyway. They reached Redemption Creek by midday. The town was transformed, lanterns strung between buildings, long tables laden with food, a platform built for dancing. Music drifted through the air, fiddles and guitars and laughter. People turned to stare as they rode in. Margaret felt the weight of their eyes, but kept her head high. Miles dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. Ready? He asked quietly. No, but let's do it anyway. They walked into the festival together. The whispers started immediately. Margaret caught fragments. Barely 2 months. Bought her at auction. Scandalous. Then Sarah Mitchell appeared, the young woman who'd given Margaret the rattle. Mrs. Flynn, Mr. Sutton, I'm so glad you came. She linked her arm through Margaret's like they were old friends. Come on, you have to try Mrs. Henderson's apple pie. It's absolutely divine. Just like that, the whispers faded. Sarah's acceptance gave others permission. Soon, they were surrounded by friendly faces. Ranchers Miles knew, women who remembered Margaret from before Patrick died, even some who'd been at the auction and looked ashamed of it now. Not everyone was kind. Dutch Kearney sat at a corner table, his jaw still wired from where Miles had broken it. His eyes followed them with hatred. Rebecca Wilson stood with a group of church ladies, her expression pinched. But for every hard stare there were 2 smiles. For every whisper, there were 3 genuine greetings. Margaret felt something in her chest begin to unfurl. The dancing started as the sun began to set. Miles led her to the platform, his hand warm in hers. The fiddle struck up a waltz, and Miles pulled her closer than was strictly proper, but not quite scandalous. I wasn't lying, he murmured. I'm terrible at this. Then follow my lead. They swayed together, Miles stepping on her toes only twice. Margaret found herself laughing, genuine and free, for the first time in months. Around them, other couples danced. Above them, lanterns swayed in the breeze. And in Miles's arms, Margaret felt something she'd thought was gone forever. She felt hope. Margaret, Miles said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart stuttered. What? I love you. The words were simple, direct, devastating. I know it's too soon. I know you're not ready to hear it. But I need to say it anyway. I love you and William both. And whether you can love me back or not, whether this goes anywhere or not, I needed you to know. Margaret stopped dancing. People swirled around them, but she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Miles, You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for anything. Just wanted you to know where I stand. No. Margaret's hands tightened on his shoulders. Let me talk. Please. He nodded, waiting. Margaret took a shaky breath. When I was at that auction, I prayed for death. Prayed that my heart would just stop so I wouldn't have to endure what was coming. Then you rode up and everything changed. Tears pricked her eyes. You gave me my life back. Not just my freedom, my actual life. And I was so grateful I was terrified. Terrified that what I felt was just gratitude, just desperation, just fear of being alone. And now I know the difference. She met his eyes. I'm falling in love with you, Miles Sutton. Maybe I already have. And it terrifies me because it's so soon and I don't know if I can trust it. But it's there, and it's real, and I don't want to fight it anymore. Miles's expression was wonder and disbelief and joy all mixed together. You're sure? No, but I'm sure I want to try. Sure I want to see where this goes. She managed a shaky smile. Is that enough? It's everything. Miles pulled her close and buried his face in her hair. Around them, people were definitely staring now, but Margaret didn't care. She wrapped her arms around him and let herself hold on. When they finally pulled apart, Miles's eyes were bright. Let's get out of here. What? The festival, the people, let's leave. He grinned, sudden and boyish. I want to talk to you without an audience. Margaret laughed. Where will we go? I know a place. They slipped away from the festival, retrieved their horses, and rode out of town. Miles led her to a ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, the lights of Redemption Creek twinkled. Above them, stars blazed in the clear autumn sky. Miles spread his coat on the ground, and they sat together, shoulders touching, looking out at the world spread beneath them. I used to come here after Sarah died, Miles said quietly. Sit for hours trying to figure out how to keep living. Sometimes I wasn't sure I wanted to. Margaret's chest ached. What changed? Time. Work. Eventually the pain got quieter. He paused. But I never stopped being lonely. Not until you and William showed up. We're a lot of trouble. Best kind of trouble. Margaret leaned against him, letting her head rest on his shoulder. Miles's arm came around her warm and solid and safe. Tell me something, she said. Something you've never told anyone. Miles was quiet for a long time. Then, sometimes I dream about the war, about the men I killed, and sometimes in those dreams they have faces I know. Patrick, Chen, even William. His voice was rough. I wake up convinced I'm going to hurt everyone I care about. That violence is all I'm good for. That's not true. Isn't it? Look what I did to Dutch Kearney. I broke his jaw, put 3 men in the hospital, and I'd do it again without hesitation if it meant keeping you safe. That's not violence. That's protection. There's a difference. Is there? Margaret pulled back to look at him. Yes. Violence destroys. Protection preserves. You've never hurt anyone who wasn't trying to hurt someone else first. That's not the same thing. You sound very certain. I am certain. I've seen violence, Miles. Real violence. Patrick came back from the war changed. Sometimes he'd get this look in his eyes and I'd know he was somewhere else. Somewhere dark. And those times I was afraid. She touched his face. I've never been afraid of you. Not once. Not even at the auction when you were a stranger. Why not? Because I saw your eyes. Saw the way you looked at William. Saw how careful you were not to touch me without permission. She smiled. Violent men don't ask permission. Miles caught her hand and pressed it to his cheek. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. You deserve happiness. You deserve love. You deserve everything good. Margaret's throat was tight. And I want to be the one to give it to you. If you'll let me. If I'll Margaret, I'm the one who should be asking that. Then ask. Miles took a breath. Then he shifted, moving to kneel in front of her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold ring, the same one he'd mentioned once, his mother's ring. Margaret Flynn, he said, his voice shaking. I know it's too soon. I know people will talk. I know you might not be ready. But I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He held up the ring. Will you marry me? Will you let me be William's father? Will you build a life with me in that valley, away from all these people who think they know what's right for you? Margaret stared at the ring glinting in the starlight, at this man kneeling in the dirt offering her everything he had, at the future stretching out before them, uncertain but bright. She thought about Patrick, about the life they'd had, about the dreams that had died with him. Then she thought about the dreams being born, about mornings with Miles, about watching William grow up with a father who'd love him, about building something new from the wreckage of everything she'd lost. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Miles's face transformed. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and then pulled her into his arms. They kissed for the first time, tentative and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were crying. When? Miles asked. Soon, before winter really sets in, before I lose my courage. You won't lose your courage, but soon is good. Soon is perfect. They sat together under the stars planning. Small ceremony. Just Chen and maybe Sarah Mitchell and the pastor. Nothing fancy. Nothing public. Just the two of them and William and the vows that mattered. People will talk, Margaret said. Let them. We'll be too busy being happy to listen. Margaret laughed through her tears. I can't believe this is happening. 2 months ago I was being sold at auction. Now I'm engaged. It feels like a dream. If it's a dream, don't wake up. Miles kissed her forehead. Stay here with me. In this moment. In this life we're building. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I promise. They rode back to the ranch under moonlight, their hands linked between their horses. When they arrived, Chen took one look at Margaret's face and the ring on her finger and smiled. About time, he said. William was asleep in his basket. Margaret picked him up, breathing in his baby smell, her heart so full it hurt. We're getting married, she told him softly. You're going to have a father, a real father, who will love you and protect you and teach you to be good. Miles came to stand beside her, looking down at William with an expression of wonder. Can I hold him? Margaret passed the baby over. Miles cradled William against his chest, and the baby settled immediately, like he knew he was safe. I'll be a good father to him, Miles said quietly. I swear it. I know you will. Chen appeared with tea. We celebrate tomorrow. Tonight you rest. Big changes coming. Need energy. He was right. Everything was about to change. But for the first time since Patrick died, Margaret wasn't afraid of change. She was ready for it. That night, lying in Miles's bed, soon to be their bed with William sleeping peacefully beside her, Margaret thought about the long road that had brought her here. The grief, the humiliation, the terror, and the man who'd ridden into her darkest moment and offered light. She touched the ring on her finger and smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow they'd start planning the wedding. Tomorrow they'd face whatever came next. But tonight she let herself simply be grateful. Grateful for second chances, for unexpected love, for the family being born from the ashes of everything she'd lost. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. Inside, Margaret finally let herself believe in happiness again. And in the loft above, Miles lay awake staring at the ceiling, hardly daring to believe that Margaret had said yes, that he got to keep her, that loneliness was finally mercifully over. He thought about Patrick, about the debt he'd meant to repay. Somehow saving Patrick's widow had saved him too. Maybe that was how grace worked. Maybe saving others was just another way of being saved yourself. Miles closed his eyes and sent up a prayer of thanks to whatever God was listening, to Patrick's memory, to the twist of fate that had brought him to Redemption Creek on exactly the right day. He was getting married. He was going to be a father. He was going to spend the rest of his life with a woman who saw past his scars to the man beneath. It was more than he'd ever dared to hope for. It was everything. Margaret woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Miles chopping wood outside. For a moment, she just lay there, the ring on her finger catching the light, trying to convince herself this was real. She was engaged to Miles Sutton, the man who'd bought her freedom and somehow impossibly won her heart. William stirred beside her, making small, hungry noises. Margaret picked him up and carried him to the window. Below, Miles paused in his work and looked up. Their eyes met across the distance, and he smiled that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. Margaret's chest ached with something that felt like joy. "Your new papa," she whispered to William. "What do you think?" William gurgled and reached for the window, his small fist opening and closing. Margaret laughed and kissed his soft hair. By the time she'd dressed and nursed William, Chen had breakfast ready. Miles came in as she was sitting down, his hair damp from washing at the pump. "Morning," he said, suddenly shy. "Good morning." Chen looked between them and grinned. "You two act like strangers. It's silly. You getting married. Sit close, hold hands, practice being together." Miles's ears went red, but he sat beside Margaret instead of across from her. Their shoulders touched. It felt both strange and right. "We should talk about the wedding," Margaret said. "What do you want?" Miles asked. "Big ceremony? Small, just us?" "Small. Very small. I don't need a crowd. Just—" She paused. "Just people who actually care. Pastor Wilson can marry us. He's a good man, even if his daughter isn't." Miles took a breath. "When?" "2 weeks, that gives us time to prepare, but not enough time to lose our nerve." "You think you might lose your nerve?" Margaret met his eyes. "Don't you?" "Terrified," Miles admitted. "But more terrified of not doing it." Chen set down bowls of rice and eggs. "You both think too much. Love not supposed to be complicated, is simple. You care for each other. You want to be together. You make it official. Done." "Chen's right," Margaret said. "We're making this harder than it needs to be." Miles reached under the table and found her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. 2 weeks then. Small ceremony. Just us and whoever you want there. Sarah Mitchell. She was kind to me. Good. Anyone else? Margaret thought about the women who'd whispered at the auction, about the men who'd bid on her like livestock, about all the people in Redemption Creek who'd judged her. "No," she said. "Just Sarah, and Chen, and Pastor Wilson. That's enough." Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret threw herself into preparations. She altered one of her old dresses, adding lace she'd found in a trunk in the barn. Chen helped her make a cake, teaching her a recipe that used honey instead of sugar. Miles built William a proper crib, sanding the wood smooth, so there were no splinters. They worked together in easy silence, but there was tension too. The knowledge that soon everything would change. That they'd be husband and wife bound by law and vows and choice. One evening, a week before the wedding, Margaret found Miles on the porch, staring at the mountains. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and joined him. "Having second thoughts?" she asked quietly. "No, no, just nervous." "About what?" Margaret's face heated. "About after. About being a wife again. About—" She couldn't finish. Miles understood. "Margaret, we'll go as slow as you need. I'm not expecting." He stopped struggling for words. "I want you. God knows I want you, but I can wait until you're ready, however long that takes." "What if I'm never ready? Then we'll figure something else out." He turned to face her. "I'm not marrying you for that. I'm marrying you because I love you, because I want to wake up next to you every morning, because I want to be William's father and grow old with you and build a life that matters." He paused. "Everything else, we'll figure it out as we go." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "How did I get so lucky? I'm the lucky one." Miles touched her face. "You could have said no. You could have left. You're choosing to stay, to build this with me. That's not luck. That's grace." They stood together in the fading light, his arm around her shoulders, her head against his chest. Inside, Chen was singing while he cooked. William was babbling to himself. The evening star appeared over the mountains. Everything was about to change. But somehow, it already felt like home. The night before the wedding, Sarah Mitchell rode out to the ranch with a gift, a beautiful quilt her grandmother had made soft and warm and stitched with love. "Every bride needs something special," Sarah said, pressing it into Margaret's hands. "Grandma would have wanted you to have it." Margaret was crying before she could stop herself. "Sarah, I can't." "Yes, you can. You deserve beautiful things. You deserve happiness." Sarah hugged her tight. "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for finding it." After Sarah left, Margaret sat with the quilt in her lap, running her fingers over the careful stitches. She thought about all the women who'd made quilts like this. All the brides who'd started marriages with hope and fear mixed together. She thought about her own mother dead before Margaret married Patrick. What would she think of all this, of Margaret marrying again so soon? Of Miles with his quiet strength and his haunted eyes? Margaret thought her mother would approve. Would see past the scandal to the truth underneath, that Miles was a good man, that this was a second chance, that love didn't follow rules or timelines. That night Margaret barely slept. She lay in the darkness listening to Miles move restlessly in the loft above her, both of them awake and waiting for morning. When dawn finally came, it was clear and cold frost glittering on the grass. Margaret dressed carefully in her altered dress, her hands shaking on the buttons. Chen appeared with flowers he'd hidden in the barn, late asters and golden aspen leaves, simple and beautiful. "You look like princess." Chen set his eyes bright. "I look like a widow getting married too fast." "No, you look like woman who choosing life is most beautiful thing." Miles was already dressed when she emerged, wearing a clean shirt and pants, his hair combed, his face freshly shaved. He stared at her like she was something miraculous. "Margaret," he breathed. I don't have words." "Neither do I." They rode to Redemption Creek together. William bundled between them. Chen rode behind, singing softly in Chinese. The morning was so beautiful it hurt, golden light, clear air, mountains sharp against blue sky. Pastor Wilson was waiting at the small church on the edge of town. Sarah Mitchell stood beside him, beaming. A few other people had gathered too, Mrs. Donnelly from the boarding house, Tom Fletcher, who'd brought the warning about Dutch Kearney, even Mrs. Patterson from the general store. Margaret's throat tightened. She'd expected judgment, expected whispers, but these people were smiling, were genuinely happy for them. "Ready?" Pastor Wilson asked. Miles took Margaret's hand. "Ready." They stood before the altar with William in Margaret's arms. Pastor Wilson opened his Bible and began to speak about love and commitment and the grace of second chances. Margaret barely heard the words. She was too focused on Miles's face, on the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never dared to speak, on the promise in his eyes. "Do you, Miles Sutton, take Margaret Flynn to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" I do. Miles's voice was steady and sure. And do you, Margaret Flynn, take Miles Sutton to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? Margaret looked at Miles. At this man who'd saved her, who'd given her back her life and her hope and her future, who'd promised to love William like his own son. I do, she whispered. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Pastor Wilson smiled. Miles, you may kiss your bride. Miles stepped closer, his hands gentle on her face. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, people clapped and cheered. William chose that moment to grab Miles's hair and yank hard. Miles laughed against Margaret's lips. That's my son, he said, wonder in his voice. That's my son. Margaret started crying, then happy tears that wouldn't stop. Miles held her and William, both his arms strong and steady around them. We're a family now, he whispered. A real family. After the ceremony, Mrs. Donnelly insisted they come to the boarding house for a meal. She'd prepared a feast roast chicken, fresh bread, vegetables, and a cake that rivaled Chen's. The small group gathered around the table, talking and laughing, celebrating this unlikely marriage. Sarah Mitchell raised her glass. To Miles and Margaret, may your love grow stronger with every passing year. To Miles and Margaret, everyone echoed. Margaret looked around the table at these people who'd become her friends. At Chen, who'd taught her so much about acceptance. At Sarah, who'd offered kindness when no one else would. At Mrs. Donnelly, who'd protected her that first terrible night. And at Miles, her husband now, who was holding William and trying to keep him from grabbing everyone's food. Thank you, Margaret said, her voice breaking. All of you, for being here, for accepting us, for... She couldn't finish. You deserve happiness, Mrs. Donnelly said firmly. Both of you. Don't let anyone tell you different. They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon, the three of them together now. Miles insisted Margaret ride with William while he led the horses, claiming he wanted to walk. But Margaret saw the truth. He was giving her time to adjust, to process, to prepare for what came next. When they reached the cabin, Chen had made himself scarce, retreating to the barn with a knowing smile. The cabin was warm and clean, a fire burning in the hearth. Someone, probably Chen, had put fresh flowers on the table. Margaret put William down for a nap, then stood in the main room feeling suddenly awkward. She was married now. This was her wedding night, but she didn't know what to do. Didn't know what Miles expected. Miles seemed to sense her nervousness. I'm going to check on the horses, he said quietly. Give you some time. Miles, wait. He paused at the door. I don't want you to leave. I want... Margaret took a breath. I want us to start this right. Together. Miles crossed back to her slowly. What do you need? I need you to kiss me again. Like you mean it this time. Something ignited in Miles's eyes. He pulled her close and kissed her deeper than before, with all the want he'd been holding back. Margaret melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I've wanted to do that for weeks, Miles admitted. So have I. Margaret took his hand. Come on. She led him to the bedroom, their bedroom now. Miles sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her between his knees. We can wait, he said, if you're not ready. I'm tired of waiting, tired of being afraid. Margaret touched his face. I want this. Want you. Want to start our marriage right. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. What happened next was tender and awkward and beautiful. Miles was patient and gentle, checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable. Margaret fumbled and blushed and laughed, and somehow that made it better. More real. This wasn't just desire. It was connection. It was choosing each other. It was building something new from the broken pieces of their pasts. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Miles's hand tracing patterns on her shoulder. Margaret felt peaceful for the first time in months. Complete. "I love you," Miles said quietly. "I love you too. Think we'll be any good at this? At being married?" Margaret smiled. "We'll figure it out, just like everything else." William woke up crying, and Miles went to get him, bringing the baby back to bed. They lay together, the three of them, William babbling happily between his parents. "This is what I wanted," Miles said, wonder in his voice. "When I came west, when I bought this land, I wanted something like this. I just didn't know it until now. A family. A home." He kissed her forehead. "You're my home, Margaret. You and William both." As autumn deepened into winter, they settled into their new life. Miles taught Margaret to ride better, to shoot straight, to read the weather. Margaret taught Miles to laugh more, to talk more, to let people in. William grew stronger, learning to sit up, to reach for toys, to smile at his parents with pure joy. Miles was devoted to him, spending hours playing with the baby, singing the same songs Patrick once sang. "He would have liked you," Margaret said one day, watching Miles make silly faces at William. "Patrick, I mean. He would have been glad you're raising his son." "I hope so." Miles looked at her. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me instead of, I don't know, waiting longer, finding someone else?" "Never." Margaret moved to his side. "You saved us, Miles. But more than that, you loved us. You chose us. That's worth everything." Winter came hard and cold, but the cabin was warm. They spent long evenings by the fire, Miles reading aloud while Margaret sewed and William played on his blanket. Chen joined them most nights, teaching them Chinese songs and telling stories about his homeland. Sometimes Margaret thought about the auction, about standing on those courthouse steps, certain her life was over, about the men who'd bid on her like she was property. She thought about Dutch Kearney, his jaw wired shut, his pride shattered. About Rebecca Wilson, who'd wanted Miles to be someone he wasn't. About all the people who'd judged her for moving on too fast. And she felt sorry for them. Sorry they couldn't understand that grief didn't follow schedules. That love could bloom in ashes. That sometimes the best things came from the worst moments. One night in December, a blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days. They played cards and told stories and made love while William slept. On the third night, Miles pulled out his mother's Bible and showed Margaret his family tree, written in faded ink. "I want to add William," he said. "If that's all right. Add him as my son." Margaret's eyes burned. Patrick would want that. Would want William to have a father who loves him. Miles carefully wrote William's name in the Bible, his hand steady despite his emotion. "William Flynn Sutton," he read aloud. "Born March 15, 1878, son of Margaret and Miles Sutton." "It's perfect," Margaret whispered. When spring finally came, they planted a garden together. Margaret showed Miles what her mother had taught her, and Miles showed Margaret tricks he'd learned from years of working the land. William played in the dirt, eating more than he planted, making them both laugh. One afternoon in May, Margaret realized she was late, very late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Miles one evening after dinner, "I think I'm pregnant." Miles went very still. Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I think so." Miles crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Margaret, my God, another baby. Are you happy?" "Happy I'm—" He pulled back to look at her face. "I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. Is that happy?" Margaret laughed through tears. "That's happy." The baby came in January, a girl with Miles's gray eyes and Margaret's dark hair. They named her Sarah Grace, after the 2 women who'd shown them kindness when they needed it most. William, now almost 2, was fascinated by his baby sister. He brought her toys and patted her head gently, saying, "Baby," over and over. Margaret watched Miles hold their daughter, his face full of wonder, and felt her heart overflow. This was her family. This was her life, built from loss and grief and one man's impossible kindness. Sometimes she still dreamed about the auction, about the gavel coming down, about strange men circling. But now when she woke, gasping, Miles was there. He held her until the fear faded, reminding her she was safe, that she was loved, that those days were over. One spring afternoon when Sarah was 3 months old and William was running wild through the meadow, Miles and Margaret sat on the porch watching their children. "I never thought I'd have this," Miles said quietly. "Never thought I deserved it." "We both deserve it. We survived. We chose each other. We built something good from something terrible." Margaret took his hand. "That's not luck. That's grace." Miles pulled her close. "Do you remember what you said the day I bought you? You asked me why." "I remember. I said because no decent man could watch it happen. But that wasn't the whole truth." He paused. "The truth is, I saw you standing there with William, and I saw every person I'd failed to save. Every soldier I'd lost. Every person I couldn't protect. And I thought, not this time. This time, I get to make a difference." "You did make a difference. You changed everything." "We changed each other." Miles kissed her hair. "You gave me back my life too, Margaret. Made me remember what I was fighting for all those years. Made me believe in futures again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching William chase butterflies while Sarah dozed in Margaret's arms. The mountains stood eternal in the distance. The valley spread green and gold before them. Chen appeared from the garden, his arms full of vegetables. "Dinner soon," he called. "Big dinner. Celebrate spring." "We'll be there," Miles called back. But they didn't move. They just sat together, this family forged from loss and love, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Margaret thought about that day at the auction, about the moment the gavel fell, about thinking her life was over. She'd been so wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. Everything before had been prologue. Everything after was the real story, and it was a story worth living. "Miles," she said quietly. "Yes. Thank you for riding up that day, for paying more than I was worth, for seeing me when no one else did. You were always worth more than they asked, more than I had to give." Miles turned her face toward his. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a broken-down cavalry soldier with more silence than sense, for making me believe in second chances." "Third chances," Margaret corrected with a smile. "Maybe fourth. We've had a lot of chances." "Then let's not waste any more of them." Miles kissed her softly. "Let's just be happy." "Deal." They sat together as the light faded, their children safe, their home secure, their love tested and proven true. The auction was years behind them now. The grief had faded to memory. The fear had transformed into strength. They'd survived the worst and found the best. They'd been broken and remade. They'd lost everything and gained more than they'd ever imagined. And in the quiet hills above Redemption Creek, where once a desperate woman had prayed for death, a family thrived. A love grew. A future unfolded. Because sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. And sometimes the man who rides up late, who drops gold on a table and says, "I'll take them," isn't buying property. He's saving lives, including his own. That's what Miles Sutton did the day he rode into Redemption Creek. He saved Margaret Flynn and her baby from a fate worse than death. But in doing so, he saved himself from a life of loneliness and regret. Love has a way of doing that, of saving us when we save others, of healing us when we offer healing, of making us whole when we help others become whole. Margaret Flynn. Sutton understood that now, understood that the worst day of her life had led to the best days, that shame had transformed into strength, that loss had created space for love. She looked at her husband, her children, her home, and felt nothing but gratitude. This was her life now. This was her family. This was her redemption. And it was worth every moment of suffering that had brought her here. In the end, that's all any of us can hope for, that our pain leads somewhere, that our losses teach us something, that the worst days make the good days sweeter. Margaret had all of that and more. She had a man who loved her without conditions, children who needed her, a home that sheltered her, a future that stretched bright and endless before her. She had everything she'd ever wanted given to her by a stranger who became her salvation, by a cowboy who rode up late and changed her world forever, by Miles Sutton, who proved that sometimes love doesn't follow rules, it just follows hearts that are brave enough to risk everything for a chance at happiness. And in that small valley in Montana, under wide skies and ancient mountains, they built a life that mattered, a love that lasted, a family that proved redemption was real. Because in the end, that's what this story was always about: redemption. For Margaret, who'd been sold like livestock and found dignity again. For Miles, who'd survived war and loneliness and learned to live again. For William, who got a father. For Sarah, who got a family. For Chen, who found a home. For everyone who'd ever been broken and wondered if wholeness was possible. The answer Margaret knew now was yes. Always yes. Wholeness was possible. Happiness was possible. Love was possible, even in the darkest moments. Even after loss. Even when you're standing on a courthouse step with strange men bidding on your future. Even then, especially then, hope can ride in on a dusty horse and offer you a second chance. All you have to do is be brave enough to take it. Margaret had been that brave. Miles had been that brave. Together, they'd built something beautiful from ashes, and that was the greatest redemption of all.